a lot of what we're talking about. Faith is whatever you actually believe is. We had mapped the universe. We knew what all of the matter was. We knew where the edge of the universe.
The year 2018 started with what many called Hollywood's most powerful speech in living memory. On January 7th, Oprah Winfrey stepped onto the Golden Globe stage, accepted the Cecil B. DeMille Award, and delivered something nobody saw coming. Their time is up. 3 standing ovations. Tears on A-list faces. Within hours, millions of people were calling for her to run for president. 5 months later, a CNN investigation dropped like a bomb. And the man at the center of it was not some obscure executive hiding in the shadows. It was Morgan Freeman, one of the most celebrated, beloved, and morally authoritative actors in the history of American cinema, the man who played God. Put these 2 stories side by side, and something deeply uncomfortable emerges. Not just about Hollywood, about all of us. A mirror held up to the industry's face. The reflection was not pretty. Stay with us. This story is not what you think it is. Setting the stage. Hollywood before the reckoning. To understand why 2018 hit the way it did, you have to understand what came just before it. October 2017, the New York Times publishes a bombshell investigation into Harvey Weinstein, one of the most powerful producers in Hollywood, detailing decades of alleged sexual misconduct against women in the industry. Days later, The New Yorker follows with an even more devastating account. Within weeks, the walls come crashing down. Weinstein is fired from his own company. Dozens of women come forward.
Film producer Harvey Weinstein fired late Sunday from the Weinstein Company following decades of sexual harassment allegations.
And a hashtag, #MeToo, originally created by activist Tarana Burke in 2006, goes viral on social media in a way no one could have predicted. Within days, the hashtag had been used in posts more than 12 million times. It wasn't just Hollywood anymore. It was everywhere. Every industry, every country. The Me Too movement had arrived, and it was not going to be quiet. Now here is where you need to pause and really take this in, because the atmosphere in Hollywood in late 2017 was one of genuine reckoning. People were scared. Careers were ending overnight. Men who had spent decades operating with impunity were suddenly finding themselves named, exposed, and unemployable. And into this atmosphere walked the 2018 Golden Globe Awards, the first major Hollywood ceremony since the Weinstein story broke. The question on everyone's mind was simple. What would Hollywood do? Would it acknowledge what was happening? Or would it dress up, smile for the cameras, and pretend everything was fine? The answer came in waves. The red carpet was a sea of black. Nearly every actress, every actor, every producer who walked into the Beverly Hilton that night wore black as a symbol of solidarity with survivors of sexual harassment and assault. The Time's Up movement, a coalition launched by Hollywood women to fight sexual misconduct, had turned the biggest party in the entertainment calendar into a statement. And then Oprah walked on stage. The speech, January 7th, 2018. Let's be clear about what Oprah Winfrey meant to that moment. She was not just another celebrity. She was the first Black woman to receive the Cecil B. DeMille Award, the Golden Globe's Lifetime Achievement Prize, in the award's entire 66-year history, and she was receiving it on a night when Hollywood was, for the first time in living memory, being forced to confront the monsters it had protected for decades. Introduced by Reese Witherspoon, Oprah took the stage to a standing ovation, and she did not waste a single second of her time. She spoke about a 9-year-old girl watching Sidney Poitier become the first Black man to win an Oscar in 1964.
Sidney Poitier. He broke Hollywood's color barrier, winning Best Actor in 1964.
That little girl was her. She talked about the long arc from that moment to this one. She honored Reese Taylor, a Black woman who was gang-raped by 6 white men in Alabama in 1944 and never received justice. She acknowledged the press, which she said was under siege, but remained essential to exposing truth. And then she said the words that stopped the room. She said that for too long, women had not been heard or believed when they dared to speak their truth. She said she wanted to express gratitude to all the women who had endured years of abuse and assault because, like her own mother, they had children to feed and bills to pay and dreams to pursue. She turned to the little girls watching at home and she said, "A new day is on the horizon." 3 standing ovations. tears, chills, trending worldwide before she even left the stage. Now ask yourself this, and this is a question this video wants you to sit with. When Oprah said, "Their time is up," about the powerful men who silence women, who did she think she was talking to? Did she believe those men were strangers to her? Faraway villains she had never shaken hands with? Or was she, like most of Hollywood, speaking in a room where the problem was closer than anyone wanted to admit? We are not saying Oprah knew anything about Morgan Freeman. We are not implying she did. What we are saying is that the story of 2018 is, in part, the story of how hard it is to truly reckon with something when the problem is not just out there, but right next door, right in your industry, right in your circle, right on the same stage. Keep that thought. We'll come back to it. Morgan Freeman, the man behind the myth. To understand the weight of what happened in May 2018, you need to understand who Morgan Freeman was and is in the American cultural imagination. Born in Memphis, Tennessee in 1937, Morgan Freeman spent decades building one of the most distinguished acting careers in Hollywood history, from Driving Miss Daisy to The Shawshank Redemption.
Rehabilitated? Well, now let me see.
To his Academy Award-winning performance in $1 Million Baby in 2005, Freeman became something rare in Hollywood, an actor who transcended the industry itself. His voice became synonymous with authority, calm, and moral gravity. He narrated March of the Penguins. He hosted Through the Wormhole, exploring the deepest questions of science and existence. He played God, literally, in Bruce Almighty. He played Nelson Mandela. He played the President of the United States. In film after film, decade after decade, Freeman was cast not just as a character, but as a conscience. Directors and studios understood that putting Morgan Freeman on screen was a shortcut to gravitas, that audiences would extend him a level of trust they gave almost no one else. That trust was not manufactured. It was earned. Freeman had spent decades giving interviews that were thoughtful, measured, and consistently gracious. He spoke openly about the struggles of growing up black in the Jim Crow South. He talked about the long road from poverty to Hollywood stardom without bitterness and with the kind of perspective that made people feel they were listening to someone who had genuinely lived. He was not playing a wise elder. He seemed to actually be one. In a culture that is deeply suspicious of its celebrities, Morgan Freeman was one of the few who had managed to remain genuinely beloved. Not just popular, not just famous, beloved, trusted, revered. Which is precisely why what happened next hit so hard, because when allegations surface about someone the public has already decided is one of the good ones, the reaction is not just shock, it is grief. A specific, disorienting grief, the kind that makes people want to argue the story away rather than sit with it. In January 2018, the same month as Oprah's Golden Globe speech, Morgan Freeman sat in the audience at that same ceremony. He had received the Cecil B. DeMille Award himself. Years earlier, he was part of the inner circle, part of the institution, part of the room that was, that night, declaring a new era. 5 months later, that institution would turn and look directly at him. The CNN investigation, May 24, 2018. On May 24, 2018, CNN published an investigation that would shake Hollywood all over again, just months after the industry had declared its Me Too reckoning well underway. The report, co-authored by CNN entertainment reporter Chloe Mellis,
Morgan Freeman at a junket last year. Right when I walked into the room, he began making sexually suggestive comments to me.
And journalist Nicole Chavez, was the result of a months-long investigation. CNN spoke with 16 people in total. 8 of them said they had directly experienced harassment or inappropriate behavior from Morgan Freeman. 8 others said they had witnessed such conduct. Think about that number for a moment. 16 people, 16 separate accounts, 8 of whom said it happened to them personally. This was not a single accusation. This was a pattern, documented across multiple films, multiple sets, and multiple years. What did they describe? According to the CNN report, women on film sets described Freeman making repeated comments about their bodies and their clothing. Several said he would stare at them in ways that made them deeply uncomfortable. 2 women described unwanted physical touching. One production assistant on the 2017 film Going in Style told CNN that Freeman repeatedly tried to lift up her skirt and asked if she was wearing underwear, and that this was not an isolated incident, but something that happened on a near-daily basis during the production. She said it was fellow cast member Alan Arkin who eventually told Freeman to stop. A senior member of the production staff on the 2012 film Now You See Me told CNN that Freeman's behavior was so well known on set that women would deliberately avoid wearing fitted clothing when they knew he would be around. 7 of the 16 people CNN spoke to described an environment at Revelations Entertainment, the production company Freeman co-founded, that included allegations of harassment or inappropriate behavior. The company, CNN noted, did not appear to have a formal structure for reporting such behavior. And then there was Chloe Mellis herself. One of the investigators who broke the story was also one of the accusers. Mellis told CNN that when she met Freeman at a press junket for Going in Style in 2017, he subjected her to inappropriate comments immediately upon her entering the room. She was 6 months pregnant at the time. According to her account, Freeman looked her up and down and made comments including, "You are ripe," and variations of, "I wish I was there." A Warner Brothers spokesperson confirmed CNN's account of the incident. It was, in fact, that experience that led Mellis to investigate whether Freeman had treated other women the same way, and what she found, alongside colleague Nicole Chavez, was that he had. Freeman responds, 2 apologies and a pushback. Morgan Freeman did not stay silent. His first statement, released through his publicist Stan Rosenfield and shared with the Associated Press, was an apology of a kind. Freeman said, "Anyone who knows me or has worked with me knows I am not someone who would intentionally offend or knowingly make anyone feel uneasy. I apologize to anyone who felt uncomfortable or disrespected. That was never my intent." Notice the language. Anyone who felt uncomfortable. The apology was conditional. It apologized for how people felt, not for specific actions. This is a distinction that advocates in the Me Too movement had been pointing to all year, what they described as the non-apology apology, in which a public figure expresses regret without accepting responsibility for anything concrete. A second statement followed the next day, and this one went further, but also pushed back harder. Freeman said he was devastated that 80 years of my life is at risk of being undermined in the blink of an eye by Thursday's media reports. He drew a distinction between what he called horrific incidents of sexual assault and what he characterized as misplaced compliments or humor. He did not deny making comments. He denied that those comments constituted harassment in the same category as assault. It was a framing that many observers found telling. The argument, essentially, that there is a meaningful line between the worst documented misconduct and what Freeman was accused of, is not without legal merit. But it struck critics as beside the point. The women who came forward were not claiming Freeman committed assault. They were claiming he created a work environment in which women were routinely sexualized, diminished, and made to feel unsafe. That experience is real regardless of where it sits on a legal spectrum. Then came the legal pressure. Freeman's attorney, Robert Schwartz, sent CNN a 10-page letter demanding a full retraction of the story and a public apology. The letter claimed that CNN had presented mischaracterized events as harassment and included what Schwartz described as objective evidence, including videotapes and on-the-record denials by the claimed victims. CNN's response was unambiguous. In a 5-page letter, the network said it stands by its reporting and is prepared to fight aggressively any attempt to intimidate it into silence. CNN stated that Schwartz's letter did not cast any shadow on the central gravamen of CNN's story, that Morgan Freeman engaged in a pattern of behavior that demeaned and sexualized women, whether or not they were in his employ. The story stood. CNN did not retract a word, and the legal threat, which had presumably been intended to force a quiet correction, instead produced a public confrontation that kept the story alive for another news cycle. The SAG-AFTRA fallout, an award under review. The professional fallout was swift. SAG-AFTRA, the Screen Actors Guild and American Federation of Television and Radio Artists, the union that represents actors across Hollywood, had just honored Morgan Freeman with a Lifetime Achievement Award earlier in 2018.
Morgan Freeman won a Lifetime Achievement Award at the SAG Awards. On Sunday, the Screen Actors Guild awarded...
It was one of the most prestigious honors the union could bestow. Within days of the CNN report, SAG-AFTRA issued a statement calling the allegations compelling and devastating. The union announced it was reviewing what corrective actions may be warranted. That phrase, corrective actions, was pointed. It meant the institution that had celebrated Freeman just months earlier was now publicly questioning whether he deserved that celebration. Let that sink in. In the same year, Oprah stood on a stage and said, "Their time is up." One of the industry's most celebrated figures was having his Lifetime Achievement Award placed under review. The same year, Hollywood wore black to the Golden Globes in solidarity with harassment victims. The union representing those same actors was reconsidering an honor it had just given out. This is not a coincidence. This is what a reckoning actually looks like when it is real and when it is messy. Not a clean story of villains and heroes, but a complicated, uncomfortable confrontation with the fact that the problem was not just over there. It was inside the room. The thematic link, what Oprah's speech and Morgan Freeman's story share. Now we arrive at the part of this story that is not told enough, because most coverage in 2018 treated these as two separate news events. Oprah's speech in January, Morgan Freeman's allegations in May. Two stories, different sections of the website, different news cycles, but they belong together, and here is why. Both Oprah Winfrey and Morgan Freeman are Cecil B. DeMille Award recipients. They share that distinction. The same honor given by the same institution in recognition of a lifetime of contributions to entertainment. Both are among the most culturally significant Black figures in the history of American entertainment. Both reached the pinnacle of Hollywood. Both were revered not just for their talent, but for what they represented: progress, excellence, dignity, and moral authority. And in 2018, both became central characters in the same story about Hollywood's relationship with power, gender, and accountability. Oprah's speech called on Hollywood and on all of us to believe women, to listen to them, to stand with them. 5 months later, 16 women came forward about Morgan Freeman, and the question Hollywood had been asked to confront: do you believe women? Do you stand with them, even when the accused is someone you love and admire? Was no longer abstract. It was personal. Now here is the question this video wants to leave you with, and it is a genuine question, not a rhetorical one. When the person being accused is not a Harvey Weinstein, not someone the industry already privately disliked, not a villain whose downfall was secretly welcomed, but someone genuinely beloved, genuinely respected, someone who has spent a lifetime being seen as one of the good ones, does the reckoning still hold? Does Hollywood's time is up apply equally to everyone? Or is the principle only easy to apply when you don't personally admire the person standing in the dock? The broader context. What 2018 revealed about Hollywood. To be fair to Oprah Winfrey, and fairness matters here, there is no documented connection between her and Morgan Freeman's alleged conduct. She did not defend him. She did not cover for him. She did not speak against his accusers. There is no evidence she knew anything about the behavior described in the CNN report. Her speech was genuine. The women who were moved by it were right to be moved. But the story of 2018 reveals something deeper than any individual's guilt or innocence. It reveals the structural problem at the heart of Hollywood, and, honestly, at the heart of most powerful industries. Here is the structural problem. Power in Hollywood is relational. It is built on friendships, loyalty, shared history, and mutual benefit. The same relationships that make a career also create the silence that allows misconduct to persist. Women who worked on Morgan Freeman's sets described an environment where speaking up felt impossible, not because they lacked courage, but because the power differential was overwhelming. He was Morgan Freeman. They were production assistants. This is the same dynamic that protected Harvey Weinstein for decades. Not just his own power, but the entire web of relationships, agents, lawyers, executives, publicists, fellow celebrities, who either knew, suspected, or chose not to ask questions. And it is worth naming something that often gets lost in these conversations. The people who enable silence are rarely villains themselves. Most of them are ordinary professionals who made a series of individually defensible decisions. Not my place, not my problem. I don't have enough information, that collectively added up to years of unchecked behavior. That is how institutions fail. Not through dramatic complicity, but through the quiet accumulation of looked-away moments. When Oprah said, "Speaking your truth is the most powerful tool we all have," she was right. but she was also speaking from a position of extraordinary power. For the women on Morgan Freeman's sets, speaking their truth meant risking their careers, their reputations, and their livelihoods in an industry that had spent decades punishing women who complained. It meant going up against a publicist, a legal team, and a public that reflexively extends goodwill to icons. It meant knowing that the story, even if it ran, might produce a few bad headlines and then quietly fade, while they remained unemployable in an industry with a long institutional memory. That is not a criticism of Oprah. That is the reality of the system she was, that night, calling on everyone to dismantle. And here is the hard truth about dismantling systems. It cannot be done from a stage. Speeches can name a problem. They can galvanize emotion. They can shift a cultural mood. But the actual dismantling happens in hiring decisions and non-disclosure agreement policies and HR structures and union contracts and the willingness of powerful people to speak up when the person behaving badly. Where did Morgan Freeman's career go? So what happened to Morgan Freeman after May 2018? The immediate aftermath was significant. Beyond the SAG-AFTRA review, several brands and organizations that had partnerships with Freeman quietly distanced themselves. The story dominated entertainment news for weeks.
Multiple women have come forward to accuse 80-year-old veteran actor Morgan Freeman of sexual harassment and inappropriate conduct.
His publicist issued statements. His attorney sent letters. The machinery of celebrity crisis management moved with practiced efficiency. But Morgan Freeman did not disappear from Hollywood. He continued working. He continued appearing in films. He continued lending his voice to projects. He appeared in Angel Has Fallen in 2019. He showed up in streaming projects and continued narration work. In the years since the CNN report, he has not faced criminal charges. The allegations described conduct that, while harmful and degrading according to the women who experienced it, did not rise to the level of criminal prosecution. What changed was subtler. The unquestioned moral authority of the pre-2018 Morgan Freeman, the man who played God, the voice of the universe, the figure whose presence on screen implied decency itself, was complicated, not erased, complicated. The cultural shorthand of his name shifted slightly. Where once it meant only gravitas and grace, it now carried a footnote, an asterisk that certain viewers could not unsee. For some audiences, that asterisk changed nothing. Art and artist, they argued, are separate. You can appreciate the performance without endorsing the person. For others, the allegations fundamentally altered the experience of watching him, made it impossible to hear that voice narrating a documentary about human dignity without an uncomfortable awareness of what had been reported about how he treated the women around him. Both reactions are understandable, and the tension between them, the inability of audiences to arrive at a collective verdict on what the accusations meant for the body of work, is itself revealing. It shows just how poorly equipped our culture is to process these situations when the accused is someone we have already deeply admired. We don't have good tools for it. We don't have agreed-upon frameworks. We are largely improvising, person by person, viewing experience by viewing experience. This too is part of the story, because one of the loudest criticisms of the Me Too movement from its supporters, not its opponents, but its supporters, has been the inconsistency of consequences. Some men lose everything permanently. Others absorb the blow and continue. And the difference often seems to come down less to the severity of the conduct and more to how beloved the person was to begin with. Is that justice? Is that how accountability is supposed to work? These are not comfortable questions, but they are the right ones. Oprah's legacy and the test of consistency. Oprah Winfrey's 2018 Golden Globe speech remains one of the most celebrated moments in recent television history. And it deserves to be celebrated, not because it solved anything, but because it named something real, and it named it with conviction, in a room full of people who had the power to act on it. But legacy is not just about the moments of proclamation. It is about what happens in the months and years that follow. Oprah has, in the years since her speech, continued to use her platform to highlight issues of gender and racial justice. She has produced documentaries and series addressing sexual abuse. She has, by most accounts, remained consistent in her stated values. What the Morgan Freeman story does, and this is important, is not undermine Oprah's speech. It contextualizes it. It reminds us that a powerful declaration and a genuine cultural change are not the same thing. That one person standing on a stage and saying, "Their time is up," does not, by itself, change a culture built over decades. Change requires institutions. It requires policies. It requires the willingness to apply principles consistently, not just to the easy cases, not just to the universally disliked, but to the beloved, the venerated, the people we have already decided are the good ones. The questions that linger and why this story still matters. We are now in 2026, and this story is worth revisiting, not to relitigate guilt or innocence, not to destroy legacies, but because the questions it raised in 2018 are still unresolved. Ask yourself these questions, genuinely. Take a moment with each one. Question 1. When we celebrate someone for speaking out against harassment and abuse, do we hold them to the same standard in how they respond when the accused is someone they know, someone they respect? Question 2. Is the Me Too movement's legacy one of genuine systemic change? Or did it succeed in removing a handful of high-profile villains while leaving the underlying power structures largely intact? Question 3. When 16 people come forward about someone beloved, and that person continues their career largely uninterrupted, what does that tell us about how Hollywood actually weighs the word of women against the value of a star? Question 4. And perhaps the most uncomfortable one. What does it say about all of us as audiences that we can hear these stories, process them, feel genuinely troubled by them, and then watch the next film and find ourselves moved by that voice again? What does that mean about human nature, about the separation of art from artist, about our own capacity for moral consistency? These are not rhetorical attacks. They are genuine questions, and the fact that they are uncomfortable does not make them less important. In fact, it makes them more important. What this story tells us about power. There is a thread that runs through every major Me Too story of that era, and it runs through this one too. The thread is power, not just the power of individual men over individual women, though that is real and that is what drove the harm described in all of these cases, but institutional power, the power of an industry that had, for decades, decided that the comfort of its stars was worth more than the dignity of the people who worked for them. Oprah Winfrey understood this. When she said, "Speaking your truth is the most powerful tool we all have," she was acknowledging that truth-telling is itself an act of power, and that for most of the women who were harassed on film sets, in press junkets, in production offices across Hollywood, the act of telling the truth was an act that cost them enormously, while the men whose behavior they described faced, at most, a temporary disruption to careers built over decades. Morgan Freeman was 80 years old when the CNN report was published. He had already won the Oscar. He had already received the Lifetime Achievement Award. He had already built a legacy that no single news cycle, however damning, could erase overnight. The women who came forward did so knowing they were taking on a legend, knowing the math, knowing that public opinion, reflexively protective of beloved icons, would not necessarily be on their side. And they came forward anyway. That, too, is part of this story, and it deserves to be remembered. Full circle, the same stage, the same award, two very different moments. Let's come full circle, because there is one detail in this story that has never received the attention it deserves. The Cecil B. DeMille Award. Oprah received it in January 2018 for, in the words of the Golden Globe Committee, her outstanding contributions to the world of entertainment. She used her acceptance of that award to deliver the defining speech of the Me Too era. Morgan Freeman received the same award years earlier. The list of Cecil B. DeMille Award recipients is a roster of Hollywood royalty: Walt Disney, Lucille Ball, Steven Spielberg, Meryl Streep, George Clooney, Denzel Washington, Barbra Streisand. It represents the industry's judgment of who among them has left the deepest mark. Both Oprah Winfrey and Morgan Freeman are on that list. Both made indelible marks on American entertainment and culture. Both represented, in different ways, the breaking of barriers. Both were celebrated with the same gilded trophy by the same institution. And in 2018, in the span of 5 months, They became the two most significant figures in a single defining story about what Hollywood claimed to stand for, and how hard it was to actually stand there. That is not a coincidence. That is the story of an industry trying to find its conscience and discovering, as many institutions do, that the conscience it was looking for had been in the room all along. Why we tell these stories? If you have watched this far, and thank you genuinely for staying with this, then you understand that this was never a simple story. It was not a story about a villain and a hero. It was not a story about hypocrisy or betrayal. It was not even at its core a story about two celebrities. It was a story about a culture, about the gap between the values we declare in public and the realities we tolerate in private, about the courage it takes to name that gap, and about how much harder it is to close it than it is to proclaim it closed. Oprah Winfrey's speech was real. The movement she stood up for was real. The pain of the women who came forward about Morgan Freeman was real. The complexity of what came after, the way a beloved figure absorbs an accusation differently than a despised one, the way consequences are distributed unevenly by fame and goodwill, that is real too. And the questions this story raises about consistency, about accountability, about who we believe and when and why, those questions deserve to stay in circulation, not as weapons, but as tools, because the thing about reckoning is that it does not happen once, in a single speech, in a single year. It happens over and over, every time a new test arrives, every time the person in the dock is someone we love. The reckoning is not over. It is a permanent condition of trying to build something better. And that, more than any speech, more than any award, more than any single news story, is what 2018 ultimately taught us. If this video made you think, if it raised questions you want to keep exploring, share it. Let other people sit with these questions too, and drop a comment below. Do you think Hollywood has truly changed since 2018? Or do you think the reckoning stalled somewhere along the way? We will be here, reading every single one.